Hi, I thought I'd explain how to calculate the equivalent units by doing a quick screencast for you guys and explaining a couple of the important points. So I'm using the slides from the chapter, which you have access to. This is the information given to us. We know that inventory in process on July 1st is 5,000 gallons. So what does that mean? That means that this inventory, these 5,000 gallons, were started the month before in June, but they were not completed. So this is what we will start with in July. All right. Every month, we're going to do one of these reports for every department. So this is the mixing department's report for July, and this is what was carried forward from June, 5,000 gallons. They tell us the $5,000 in direct materials and the $1,225 in conversion costs are what you incurred in June, and now in July, in order to finish this up, we'll incur additional costs. All right, they also tell us that during July, starting from scratch, we added brand new 60,000 gallons that we started to mix. All right, we paid $66,000 in direct materials. Our direct labor was $10,500, and our overhead was $7,275. So we have some inventory that was in process when we opened on July 1st. We have some inventory that we started brand new from scratch during the month of July. Then down here we have inventory that we started in July but didn't finish. So that's our ending WIP for the month of July. That has a question mark here, so we don't know what dollar amount is associated with that. We don't know the costs associated with that ending WIP, which is 3,000 gallons. So I'm going to leave this slide right here. I'm going to go to another slide I created, but we'll go back and forth just to refresh ourselves with the information provided. Okay, so this slide I developed, and this is how I fill out my information when I'm calculating equivalent units. And I separate the information based on the 3 time periods. I have my beginning balance, which is when I open my doors on July 1st, what is already in process. I have my started and completed. What did I start fresh in July and finish completely in July? And then I have my ending balance. So these would be items I started in July but are not quite finished, so I'll have to complete them in August. But this is the July report for mixing, so we're going to find equivalent units for each of these 3 levels of activity for the month of July. So let's fill in some of the information. If you remember on that slide, that previous slide, we know beginning balance is 5,000 gallons that are being worked on, and they're 70% complete. So here's a couple of things I want to tell you. I'm going to fill in that 70 here, and we're going to say 5,000 for gallons. All right, that's in total. Now, one of the assumptions in this chapter is that the very first thing you do in any of your processes is add 100% of your materials. So if you add 100% of the materials, and this is already in process, that means the materials were added in June. That's when we started this process. So what are we going to do in July? In July, we don't have to add any more materials. They're already in there. So those 2 values will be 0. So the remaining work, 70%, pertains only to the conversion costs. So if my beginning balance, if I open my doors on July 1st, and it tells me 70% of those 5,000 gallons is complete, that means the 70% was completed in June. Now in July, I will have to complete the additional 30%. Right? So what are my equivalent units if I am working on 30% of 5,000 units? 30% of 5,000 is 1,500, and that's my equivalent unit. That tells us that doing 30% of the work is the same as completing in their entirety 1,500 units. So let's look at the next column, started and completed. Well, I know here a couple of things. I know if we look at this slide, it says gallons transferred to packaging. So I know 62,000 gallons left mixing and went to packaging. Does that mean all those gallons were started in July and finished in July? No, it doesn't. We're going to always assume FIFO conditions and that our inventory that was first in, which are these 5,000 gallons, are the first ones out. So if 62,000 gallons transferred, we can assume 5 of those came from the work that was started in June. So 62,000 minus 5 leaves us with 57. We can now assume that 57,000 gallons was started in July and completed in July. This number that I ask all the time on exams or homework proves troublesome for some students. So please think about that before you enter a number. It is not the amount of gallons transferred. It is not the amount of gallons added during July. It is what was started in July and completed in its entirety in July. All right? So you can review the slides again for that calculation. But this line is always going to be 100%. We start the work and we finish it. So in terms of equivalent units, 100% of 57,000 means we're adding 100% of the materials in July. It also means we're adding 100% of the conversion costs in July. So that's going to be 57,000 across the board. All right, lastly on that slide, it did tell us that, let's go back, 25% of our ending inventory was 3,000 gallons was an ending inventory. It was 25% complete as to conversion. Okay, so let's go back. That's our last level here we have to complete. So it told us 25% complete, 3,000 gallons. So now again, let's break that down into percent for materials and percent for conversion. So this is different. You have to think differently for your ending balance than you do for your beginning. This ending balance now is not something that came over from June. This was started in July. That means if we started in July, like I told you before, we added all of the materials immediately. So that happened in July. So 100% of our materials came in July, right? We also know we didn't finish completely, right? As to conversion costs, we completed 25%. Once again, this work was only done in July. These are items we did not finish, but we started in July. That means the 25% must have taken place in July. Okay, and 25% of 3,000 units is the same as doing 750 units in its entirety. So we're going to add these up. That means our direct material equivalent units is 60,000, and let me do the math. Our conversion equivalent units come to 59,250. I think I'd remember that. So there we go. We have just completed steps 1 and 2 in this whole process. Step 1 is to find this number, started and completed number of units. And step 2 is to figure out our material equivalent units and our conversion equivalent units. I hope that helps explain it. In addition, let me just say that this row, our beginning balance and our started completed, once we convert these to dollars, both these rows added together will represent items that have left with mixing and gone on to packaging. This row, ending balance, is what's remaining in WIP mixing to be finished in August. Okay, so step 3, as you go through your notes, will be to calculate a dollar price per equivalent unit. All right, if you have any other questions, please reach out. Good luck.